Hey everybody, welcome to Rampage Reviews. I'm Rampage, and you have tuned into a very special edition, the review of The Acolyte. Now I will show you some interesting points that I found within this show, so let's dive in. So like I said, today we're going to review the series The Acolyte instead of a book. I felt like it was a good time to do so because it's been enough time since the series ended and there's been a lot of controversy, a lot of questions, just a lot of feelings about the show, feelings about the way that Leslie Headland wrote and directed it. I don't know how much of the writing she was involved in, but some of the writing was a little questionable and there's just a lot to talk about with it. And before I continue today, I just want to remind everybody that there will still be links in the description, even though I'm talking about The Acolyte today, for the upcoming books that I'll be reading. That way you can try to get ahead when I do my reviews later. But also note that I'm an Amazon affiliate, and if you use those links to purchase those books, it will benefit me or the channel in some way. But obviously, don't do it to benefit me. Do it so we can continue the conversation and have some healthy debates about Star Wars. Also, if you like the content that you see today, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate it if you do. As always, I give an overview of the story that I'm reviewing, so we're going to do that here too. The story takes place between 148 BBY and 132 BBY. It's actually enters into the story in 132 BBY, but they flash back 16 years prior to talk about an incident that happened with 4 Jedi, 1 Padawan and 3 Masters. Masters are Master Indara, Master Sol, Master Kelnaka, who's the Wookiee Jedi, and Padawan Torben. The 4 Jedi are investigating a vergence on planet Bardock because that was one of the planets that was involved in the Great Hyperspace Disaster, where a bunch of ship parts came out of hyperspace and destroyed the life on several planets, sometimes even destroying the planet. And Bardock was one of those planets that should have had no life on it. So the Jedi were saying, why is there life thriving on it right now? So they have to go investigate. They discover 2 twins at first, then they discover a witch coven, to which they try to diplomatically enter, but they sort of force their way in, not violently, but they strongly insist that they should be allowed in and come in. The witches are not very inviting for them there. They actually try to lie that the children are even on the planet. Sol then is able to coax the children out, Osha and May are their names, and ask if they would like to train to become a Jedi because they have sensed that they're Force sensitives, and they actually sense that the entire coven is Force sensitive. And at this point, the Jedi still don't know what this vergence is. They still don't know how the children exist. They even asked how they were created because there's no male members on the planet. So they're like, how could these 2 twins have been created? And Sol has his suspicions, but he definitely doesn't know yet. In the midst of the Jedi talking to the 2 girls about training to be a Jedi, May is the most resistant and doesn't want to do it. She wants to stay with the witch coven. Osha very much wants to become a Jedi, to which upsets May, and May goes to one of her mothers and expresses her displeasure of Osha trying to become a Jedi, to which the mother encourages May to raise a little conflict with the Jedi and also with Osha to express that they don't want them there. A fire has started on the castle. I don't know if that's what her mother intended, but a fire has started, to which May and Osha almost both perish, but Sol is able to show up and save Osha, and May fell presumably to her death, but we know later that she survived. Osha then trains to become a Jedi. She leaves the Jedi Order, and the story actually starts later on a freighter that Osha has been working on since leaving the Jedi. And 2 Jedi show up to investigate her because there is a person that matches her description that actually went and killed Master Indara. That is in the first episode of the series. And we now know that person to be May, her twin sister, but she matches the description, so she is investigated by Jedi Knight Yord and Jedi Padawan Jeki. They show up, ask her questions. They decide to take her in to further the investigation, but Sol learns of this interrogation with Osha and believes that she's not capable of this and is able to vouch on her behalf. But Osha is taken on a droid freighter that's supposed to take her to a prison, but it's hijacked by some of the people that are also in prison on the ship, and one of them happens to be a droid that can wirelessly tap into the droid ship and make them do what he wants. I don't know why they would allow him to do that, but they allowed it to happen. So the ship ends up crashing. Everyone else, except for Osha, is able to find an escape pod to leave. There's no more escape pods. Osha crashes on a planet. She's found by Master Sol later, and after she had had some visions that May had survived. So they have to investigate that now, to which they begin the search for May together. May is on a mission to kill the 4 Jedi that were involved in Bardock 16 years prior. At this point, she's killed Master Indara. She searches for Master Torben, which it was Padawan Torben 16 years ago, but he became Master sometime between then and 6 years later, then had taken the Barash Vow, which is a sort of vow of silence as a form of penitence to yourself. I guess he was so distraught by what happened, he felt like he needed to take this vow. So he is meditating and levitating in an impenetrable shield, basically, like an invisible, impenetrable force shield, which May can't get past. But eventually, she gets his attention. He comes down. She was going to poison him, but he willingly takes the poison because he understands why she's there. And I guess he feels he's deserving of this, so he kills himself, basically, and May escapes to where she travels to Kofar. The Jedi find out that she was on Olega, which is where Torben was. To find Torben and kill him, they then have to try to figure out where she's going to be next. Well, they determine that she's trying to kill the 4 Jedi that were on Bardock because they've already killed Torben and Indara, who are both on Bardock 16 years prior. So they suggest that maybe she's going to kill Kelnaka, who's the Wookiee Jedi. So they go to Kofar to find her. Her master happens to be there. there, who at this point is just called the Stranger. We don't know who it is, but when the Jedi get there, they search through the forestry planet of Kofar and is able to find Tonaka, but he is dead. Not really sure if May did it. May at one point said, I don't want to do this anymore, and tried to escape, which she wasn't able to. The Stranger then stops her from escaping and actually gets into a fight with several of the Jedi. And after he has killed quite a few Jedi already, he reveals his mask and is actually Keemir, who's like a bumbling supplier for May previously, but May did not know that that was her actual master because he had always worn a helmet previously. I'm going to try to speed up the rest of this. I don't want to take too long, but basically Keemir takes Osha back to the planet that he was on. I forget what planet he was actually located. It's actually described as an unknown planet, and a lot of people have suggested that maybe it's Aktu, and that might be. It looks like it, but we're not sure. We don't know for sure. Osha is taken there after everybody basically perishes except for Osha, May, Sol, and Keemir. Keemir and Osha leave. May realizes that Osha was unconscious before Keemir took her and decided to style her hair in the same way as Osha to go with Sol. Sol tries to explain to May how sorry he is for what happened. Keemir tries to convince Osha that the Jedi are not the best serving for the galaxy and that the Republic isn't the best serving for the galaxy. Osha then discovers that May is likely with Sol because of how everybody left on the planet. So then they have to try to find Sol and May. Sol and May go to Bardock. Keemir and Osha show up as well, and they also discover that the Jedi had heard a beacon coming from Sol's ship, and I believe he set that off when he landed on the planet. Keemir and Sol get into a big fight on the planet after they find each other, to which May intervenes, takes his lightsaber. Instead of killing Sol, makes Sol admit that he killed their mother by accident, and he admits to it, and Osha hears it in the background, and after she hears it, she's so angry and full of grief that she begins to force choke Sol. At one point, May had thrown Sol's lightsaber, and the Kyber crystal had dislodged a bit. Didn't fall out of the lightsaber, but it did dislodge enough to kind of stick out of the shaft of the lightsaber. Osha picked it up, and while she's force choking Sol, she actually bleeds the Kyber crystal to where it turns red. She finally crushes Sol's larynx. He dies. May, Osha, and Keemir are left to determine what to do after that. And the Jedi had made their way to the planet, led by Master Vernestra Rowe, who's from the High Republic also. She's over 100 years old at this point. She senses Keemir on the planet for some reason. It's rumored that maybe Keemir was her Padawan at some point, because Keemir did tell Osha that he used to be a Jedi. So the Jedi aren't able to find them. Keemir tells Osha and May that he feels the best way to keep them both safe is if one of their memories is wiped of the other one, so that way they can't implicate each other to any crimes that were committed. May tells Osha that she should go train with Keemir, and May's memory is then wiped. May is found by the Jedi. The Jedi take her in, knowing that she committed the crimes that she did, but she doesn't remember it because her memory is wiped at this point. And Keemir leaves with Osha to where presumably they will start training together. So, I don't know how long that was. It's without editing, the video is 15 minutes long at this point. So there are lots of things that if you sat back and nitpicked it and were highly critical of some things that could have been more polished, and for that reason then find reasons to not like the show. But if you can look past some of these petty things that might have been noticed by some of their fans, then it actually is a decent story. I felt like the actor for Osha and May was great. Master Sol was very decent also. I don't want to get into too much because I have my things that I found interesting coming up, and there were 28 of them, so I don't know if I'll cut any of those out. But he feels he's got this big connection to Osha when he finds her on Bardock. It is a little weird because how did he just develop this connection immediately? But anyways, the lightsaber fighting I thought was pretty fun to watch. It's been broken down by several people that the choreography was not great, and there were a lot of things found in the fighting where they did some questionable things that doesn't make much sense for somebody who was really trying to fight the other person and kill the other person. They left themselves open a lot. If you really broke it down and slow-moed it and picked it apart, you could say that. But in real time, it was fun to watch, and it was quick moving lightsaber fighting. And really at this point, I was just trying to find things that I liked about the story, which there were plenty. But now we're going to get into the things that I found most interesting about the series. First interesting thing that I found, and this is after watching the entire series, this isn't just what I thought after watching the first one because I binged the whole thing, but that Sol was a weirdly emotional Jedi through this show. He started off very sensible, very calm and collected, and as the stakes got higher, he became more and more emotional, and he was very emotional after finding Osha and May on Bardock after the whole fire started and everything was destroyed. And I just thought it was weird for a Jedi to continue to grow with this much emotion throughout the story. There are many Jedi that have dealt with, I don't know about similar things, but major events that might have had them act in a great emotion, and actually Obi-Wan obviously showed a huge part of that in episode 3. First, I felt like Sol was a uncharacteristically emotional Jedi as the story went on. When I started to think about it, I realized that there are plenty of Jedi that have actually acted out in emotion when some major things happened, and there were some major things that happened with Osha and May throughout the whole story. May is killing other Jedi, grief and anger about what happened. Sol is trying to reconcile his thoughts with what happened so he can convey it to Osha in a way that allows her to see why he did what he did. But Obi-Wan Kenobi in episode 3 was overwhelmed with sadness and grief after he had chopped off Anakin's limb and realized that he had just lost his friend. It's hard for me to think of any other Jedi that were involved in similar situations that this happened, because many of the prequel Jedi were very stoic, somewhat robotic in a way. After thinking about it, I supposed that Sol's reaction was just a breaking point for anybody, even somebody as stoic as a Jedi. Vernestra seems like the first person that would turn to the dark side at this point, because she just seems very standoffish, smug. She's a little snooty when she corrects people. She seems to have this superiority complex with a lot of people that she runs into, especially this young Jedi that she sends on errands occasionally. So I don't know if it's possible she would turn to the dark side. She was just a very weirdly smug Jedi, in my opinion. As far as the stoic Jedi is concerned, I feel like Yord and Endara exemplify the prequel Jedi in the most consistent way, because everyone else seems to have some weird quirks about them, things that I wouldn't describe a prequel Jedi to have. And it's hard to say that about Kelnaka because he's a Wookiee and you don't know exactly how he's feeling based on not knowing what he's saying. But many of the Jedi, especially people of the High Council, were very stoic figures, and it wasn't abundantly present in this series. When Osha was being transported to be imprisoned and interrogated, I mentioned this earlier, but there was a droid on the freighter that she was kept on that is able to wirelessly communicate with the droids that are flying the ship and stop flying the ship so that they can cause some panic, and one of them has this big tentacle that then attacks the droid to break themselves out and then take some escape pods to where they take all of them and Osha is unable to leave. Why would the Republic allow a droid to be on a ship that can wirelessly communicate with the droids flying the ship? Is that something, I mean, did they know he could do that? You should know if they're a droid, they're like a half droid themselves, if they can perform something like that. It's not like we see it all the time, but I mean, R2-D2 has to plug in every time something, but I mean, that's something you should probably know. I feel like lightsaber colors weren't exactly important anymore, because it feels like sometimes that people have certain colors of lightsabers that you felt like represented a certain way that they connect with the Force. We knew that green lightsabers represented a more consular Jedi, someone who's more connected to the Force. Blue, more warriors in that sense, where they're better with the lightsaber. Jedi Sentinels were people who were the best at providing protection to the people around them, and usually were used at the Jedi Temple to protect the Jedi Temple. It's funny that I said Master Vernestra could be one of the ones that is more likely to go to the dark side, because she does have a purple lightsaber, and we did associate that with Mace Windu as being able to kind of almost tap into the dark side. And Yord has a yellow lightsaber. I don't know whether he's the best at protecting the people around him. He died himself, so obviously not. But I'm just wondering, moving forward, if they're even going to matter anymore. Master Torben takes the Barash Vow and then is levitating and meditating for 10 years straight. And this is about 6 years after the incident on Bardock that he starts this. So he's levitating and meditating for 10 years. Does he stop to go to the bathroom? Does he stop to eat? Does he stop for anything else? How can he just sit there connected to the Force for 10 years and not consume any nutrients or relieve themselves at all? We don't know if that's the case, but I just want to know if he did it. Witches that were discovered on Bardock when they flash back to the Bardock incident between the witches, Osha and May, and the Jedi that were sent there to investigate a vergence are actually not from Bardock. They're from a different planet. And one of them you can tell is an Iridonian Zabrak. And I recently had found out that Iridonia is actually the homeland of the Zabraks. And Zabraks were transported to Dathomir to mate with the witches of Dathomir so that way they can continue to have more male slaves to serve them and female witches to serve other Talzin who would teach them in the ways of the witches. The fact that they're not from that planet also begs the question, did they start the life on that planet? Did the life start before they got there? Was there something else before they got there that started the life on the planet? Because obviously people couldn't survive without life existing around them to take advantage of those resources. So yeah, what was it like on Bardock before they even got there? By episode 3, I started to notice that the Jedi of the Acolyte just seemed more menacing than the prequel Jedi, and it's kind of back to the point where I said that there's not a lot of stoic Jedi in this series, but whenever they enter into a situation, it just always seems like they're just pushing their way in, and they are going to get what they want, or they're going to force it out of you. That's just the feeling that I get whenever that happens. And there are times in the prequels where the Jedi there would do the same thing, but they would either use Jedi mind trick to do this, or actually they would try to negotiate and reason with the person that they're talking with. They didn't impose themselves as much as the people in the Acolyte. And I think that's probably intentional for those Jedi to have a more menacing demeanor. They're trying to highlight the mistakes that the Jedi made during this time period that led up to the events of episode 3. In episode 3, Mother Corrin and Mother Anastasia are having a discussion while the Jedi are on Bardock, but they hadn't imposed themselves in their camp yet, and they knew of their presence there. They were discussing, the Jedi find out that they have the twins on the planet because they knew that the Jedi would try to seek them out to try to train them, and they felt like they were going to take them away. Anastasia is saying that she's their mother. Corrin then says, well, I actually carried them. Anastasia says, what if the Jedi find out how you created them? This was a weird thing to hear because I felt like it might mean that they weren't the ones who came up with this power. I don't know if they would have known Darth Plagueis before this. That's a weird stretch to make. For her to say, what if they found out how you created them? I don't know why, but it just felt like to me that she was saying, what if they find out who you've been talking to create them? I just don't think she would have said that if they were the ones that have that power, because that's something that they always would have had to guard against throughout their entire existence. You would feel like it's a weird thing to hear. Sol and several other Jedi make their way to Kofar when May is trying to find out the location of Master Kelnaka so she can take him out. And there's these big insects that are in the forest. They're like twice the size of a normal person's head. And much like regular insects do in our lives, they respond greatly to light. They want to flock to it. So when the Jedi have their lightsabers out, that sparks the interest of some of the insects while they're walking through the forest. However, there were several times while they were in the forest that they had things with light, whether it be their lightsabers or other things that had light exposed, that the insects didn't attack them with. Were they not near the insects during this time? They were in a lightsaber fight for a really long time. Did the insects not hear it? I guess I don't know if they hear, but I just felt like it was wildly inconsistent how this aspect of that episode just seemed very weirdly inconsistent. The first time that Kimir and Master Soul fight on Kofar, Master Soul had made a comment to Kimir, I believe, and I can't remember what the comment was, but Kimir responded with, "You don't remember me?" And I think a lot of people thought that meant that Soul knew him from the past, and this is somebody that's coming back to haunt Soul in some way. I kind of made the connection that maybe he just meant that they had met in that shop that he was working at, because at one point Kimir was working in this shop acting as May's supplier, and he was just like a bumbling idiot basically. And when they had gone to the shop and found out that Kimir was working with May, they had interrogated him and couldn't sense that he was a dark side user, Sith, whatever. He supposedly gave May up at that point. At that point they had met, and then when they're fighting on Kofar, he makes that statement. So I don't know whether he just meant about what happened earlier in the episode or whether he meant from a past time. When Kimir had taken Osha to talk to her about her affiliation with the Jedi and now and in the past, he had allowed her to roam free. He didn't restrain her when she was asleep, when he was healing her. At no point while they were together was she not allowed to do something. She may have not have had a ship to leave, but she could have gone wherever she wanted. She could have betrayed Kimir in some way, possibly. I don't know if he probably would have seen it coming, but it just seemed like Kimir allowed her to go wherever she wanted. Soul, on the other hand, took in May and immediately, once he found out who she was, restrained her to a bed so that he could talk to her about what happened 16 years ago. And he did this out of fear, it seemed like. Very uncharacteristic of a stoic Jedi. It seems like somebody who's very driven by his emotions at this point, and it was definitely very weird to see. I don't feel like this is talked about enough, but is it weird that Kimir had a helmet that you were basically blind in, it was a self-deprivation helmet basically, and he just used the Force to fight several Jedi, including Masters, in the forest of Kofar, and killing many of them, and almost killing Master Soul. In fact, he killed everybody except for Osha, May, or Soul. After everybody else was dead, that's when he was unmasked. Is it a little OP that he was able to do this against several Jedi? It just doesn't seem like this has been duplicated. It almost feels like something that's just a little too much for somebody to be able to accomplish in the role that it seems like he's in, which is still apprenticed to Darth Plagueis, or at least that's what it feels like. When the four Jedi investigated the vergence on Bardock, there was some episodes that pointed to Soul finding the twins in the forest, and he didn't reveal himself, but he just watched them from afar to see what they were capable of. But immediately he talked to Master Indara and said that he felt a connection with Osha, which was weird, and I believe this was before they actually talked to him in the camp. It might have been after. In either case, how is he able to develop this connection to this person so quickly when he barely even knows who she is? I don't even feel like Qui-Gon felt that much of a connection with Anakin, although he very strongly felt that he was the chosen one, so he just had a very principled reason to take him in. There was nothing making those four Jedi feel any more connected to those two than any other Force sensitive that they might have came upon. They were investigating something else, but they had no reason to believe that those two girls were the vergence they were looking for. So in the 7th episode of The Acolyte, there's a time where there's people that are riding speeders through the forest of Kofar where Kelnaka was living, and the speeders had a very signature sound to them that sounded exactly like the speeders in episode 6. So it was a really cool throwback to hear those nostalgic sounds come from this episode, almost in a mimicking fashion, have it happen on a forest planet, or what seemed to be a forest planet. When the fighting broke out on Bardock, this was after a moment where Soul was trying to call to who he thought was Osha, but was actually May, to go with them. And Mother Anastasia starts to evaporate herself, and it seems like she's going to like disappear away or go within May, and we didn't know what she was going to do. But immediately, Soul's response is to stab her in the stomach. And it just seemed like a very weird, impulsive thing to do, especially for someone who had seemed relatively stoic up until that point. He reacted very quickly, seemingly out of fear, to what Anastasia was doing. He didn't know what she was going to do. I feel like there were many other Jedi in that moment that might have just waited a little bit longer to see what was going to happen. When May and Osha are looking for each other on Bardock, and May is looking for Osha to tell her that the Jedi killed their mother, and Osha's looking for May to tell her she's upset that she started the fire, they're on this bridge that's broken and it's starting to fall, and Soul finds them, and he tries to force grab the bridge to lift them back up to save them, and he's not able to do that because the bridge is too heavy, and then May falls, but he's able to grab Osha at that point. Why didn't he just force grab Osha and May? They must be much lighter than the bridge, obviously. It would have made much more sense for him to do that, and I think being in that situation, there's plenty of times where Jedi have made questionable decisions, and you say, why didn't he just do that? And it's like with anything in the heat of the moment, you sometimes don't realize what the obvious thing to do is in the moment. You just think of what you would naturally do, maybe in that moment. So we could blame it on that. It also just seemed weird to put them in that situation in the writing, and then allow the audience to ask that question, like, why wouldn't he just force pull them off the bridge? That was the sensible thing to do. When Soul lied to Osha about the events that took place on Bardock, initially, it was actually Master Indara's idea to do that. And the reason why she told him to do that was because she felt like if she knew the truth, she would not want to go with the Jedi and train. There would be a big fallout once the Jedi and the Republic knew of what happened on Bardock, which is obviously a very deceptive thing to do. It's hard to know what the right decision decision would have been in that situation, because I think there are probably a lot of Jedi that would have just faced the music at the end of the day, which is what Sol was prepared to do. But Master Indara felt like the greater of the two evils was to lie to Osha and allow her to train in blissful ignorance at that point. Osha was in Kymir's cave on the unknown planet that he was on and found the helmet that he had been wearing before when they were on Kofar and decided to try it on. Kymir wasn't there when she did this, but when she did it, Kymir found her and then started to go into a trance himself. And I don't know if that was Osha doing it or somebody else or some other outside power doing it. Then Osha takes the helmet off and she says she had a vision of May killing Sol and then having a lightsaber in her hand, I believe. I think what you come to find out at the end of the series is that that vision was actually her. And there was no way for her to know that in the moment because they looked extremely identical at that point, but she was seeing a vision of herself. May escapes Sol after she was restrained by him and they were having that discussion earlier in the episode. And she gets onto a ship that was attached to Sol's ship and takes off. She is traveling to Bardock at that point. She decides to go through this mini asteroid field where the rocks are small enough to where it doesn't damage the ship enough, but there are some bigger rocks that start to damage the ships. Sol is chasing after her and he starts to lock onto her, and Basil is with him. He's that little rat character that's with him. Don't know how they understand him, but they do. And he actually disables the ship when he's trying to do that. Why did he do that? Did he think that Sol was trying to kill May and he didn't think May deserved that? Did he think Sol was the bad guy at this point? I think that action needs to be addressed later if there's a season 2 to this series. When Kymir and Sol were fighting on Bardock later, May had intervened and stolen Sol's lightsaber, and Kymir had told May to kill Sol at that point, but May didn't want to. She wanted to make Sol admit to what he did on Bardock 16 years ago, and she threw the lightsaber. And when she did, it hit a rock. It kind of dislodged the Kyber crystal inside. It didn't fall out of the lightsaber, but it did stick out a little bit. So then when Sol told the truth, then Osha came out, grabbed the lightsaber, and started to force choke Sol. And she then was bleeding the lightsaber when it came in contact with her hand. And the big question was, why didn't that happen to Anakin when he turned to the dark side? Well, obviously, you need to come in contact with the Kyber crystal to bleed it. And in a lot of Legends material, you would actually squeeze it and impose the will of the Force in a very forceful way to make it bleed. This seemed less so. That would be why it didn't happen to Anakin, because he didn't touch it himself. Kymir tells Osha that his helmet that he had been wearing is a sensory deprivation helmet, and she puts it on, and it's not electronic or computer helmet in any way. There's no computerized aspect to it at all. Otherwise, they probably would have showed that when she put it on, because they gave a first-person view of it, and you could see that she was practically blind. But why does his voice change when he puts on the helmet? Is that a little weird? Because is there a voice changer in there that we don't know about? But since we knew it was just a sensory deprivation helmet, it just seemed weird that his voice would have changed. It doesn't seem like it's designed to do that. When Kymir, Osha, and May are trying to escape the Jedi on Bardock after Sol had been killed, Kymir had wiped May's memory and taken Osha to train her. Where did he learn this power to wipe people's memories? I don't even think I've seen that Force power in live action previously, of people having their memory wiped. We know of the Jedi mind trick, but that seemed like a very powerful Force ability. A lot of people suggested that maybe Vernestra knew how to do that, and she had a history of wiping people's memories with certain things that would happen. When Sol and Kymir are fighting, Kymir says, "You don't remember me," and Sol says, "I sent someone familiar." So then some other people started to suggest that maybe Vernestra had wiped Sol's memory of Kymir, so that way he could have been forgotten about. So that alleviates anything that Vernestra might have done. A lot of deception by the Jedi in this show. I feel like that was a characteristic that was risky to bring out of the Jedi. And the last interesting thing that I found about this series was that all the Jedi that were on Bardock had exiled themselves after the incident. Kelnaka basically went to Kofar and is a hermit alone. Corbin had entered into the Barash Vow and not spoken to anyone in 10 years. Although it took him 6 years to do that, he still felt it necessary enough to disconnect himself from everybody else. And I don't know if Indara was exiling herself, but she was not with the Jedi Order, and she was with a bunch of people in a bar on Ueda. So everybody exiles themselves except for Sol. Obviously, this was a very unprecedented incident that affected these Jedi in a very major way, but for some reason, Sol was able to bury those feelings very deep until discovering that May was alive. So very weird that he did that. That is the last interesting thing that I found, and there were a lot. I had to rewatch the series, and I didn't binge every episode, but I just kind of skimmed through it to see what certain things that might have stuck out that were kind of weird. The series is not a bad series. It's just a very unfamiliar and unconnected series to everything else that has happened leading up to the prequels and the OT and stuff like that. So obviously with any new story where there's a lot of new characters that are not connected to any of the major characters previously, with the exception of Yoda's little cameo, it's going to feel a little weird for people, and it's probably hard for them to open up their mind to other people being allowed into the Star Wars universe because they're so used to all of the major characters that have happened. If you open yourself to the idea that there's a lot of other characters that would have existed in this universe previously and after, especially the people that read Legends books, tons of characters that aren't connected to major characters before. But in the Legends books were around a really, really long time. There are people that don't care for any of the Legends material to be included in any of the canon material. And there are people that insist that we need to go off of the Legends material because it's been around for so long and because there's a decent amount of continuity with it. Continuity isn't perfect, obviously. There's a lot of things that break each other if they were to be included in it. But there's a lot of good storytelling there that they felt like was good to reach from. It's been done. It was done in this series. It was done in the Clone Wars and Rebels, things that are grabbed from Legends material. And we'll continue to see it. I think hardcore Star Wars fans really appreciate it when they see things like that, like the Cortosis helmet, like bleeding including the Kyber crystal, lightsaber whip, which is not unique to High Republic Jedi. I have not read any material on Mara Jade, but I believe she had a whip lightsaber, so it's definitely an idea that's been around for a while. So these are cool things to see, and I think it's fair if people were allowing themselves to immerse into the story and just find its place in the canon timeline. When I watch material, I'm not trying to make sure that it fits my worldview of Star Wars. I am taking in the content because I'm not in charge of the content. Disney is now. George Lucas was before. Now it's Lucasfilms owned by Disney. And whatever they put out is now brought into the canon timeline. So I feel like I am capable enough to make sense of it myself and fit it into the canon timeline the way that it should be. Are there things that are inconsistent? Sure. But in any fantasy story, fiction story, science fiction, you can explain away any kind of inconsistency with something. And no matter how far-fetched it is, the story can be written in a way to incorporate inconsistencies. It just can, and close up loopholes, which is what Star Wars is constantly trying to do. We've seen a lot of occasions where they try to close up loopholes that we've seen. So if you view it that way, where it's part of the story now, I'm going to try to make sense of where it fits, it becomes a lot more enjoyable, because then you just open yourself to the whole universe of Star Wars, and it becomes much more fun content to watch and read. So hopefully people can take that to heart and enjoy more of the things that Disney puts out. And this one I gave a 7.8. It wasn't 8 material because of some of the writing was a little bit bad. And George Lucas has been guilty of bad dialogue, and maybe not bad storytelling, but bad dialogue for sure. It's not like Leslie Headland is the first person to have some material that might be considered bad writing. It just missed out on the 8s, and it's definitely in the high 7s, which is respectable. And it was a series that I enjoyed. I'm going to enjoy watching season 2 and see what happens. There might be weird things happen that I don't agree with there too, but we'll be back to review that if that ever happens. So I appreciate everybody who was able to stop by today and watch this review of The Acolyte. I hope to have many healthy discussions with you guys about the future of this show, the future of Star Wars, and where everything is going to fit in together. So may the Force be with you, and everybody have a great rest of your day. Thank you.